You know what's interesting is that Casey Nolan's been on this show numerous times from KSDK Channel 5.
Yes.
Casey, this repeat performance, award-winning reporter from 5-1, 5 is 1, or 5.1, is Casey Nolan. Good morning, Casey Nolan.
Good morning, McGraw. Good morning, KJ.
Good morning, Casey.
You've been on this show, numerous times, right?
Yeah. Hundreds.
How many times have I been on your Channel 9 TV show?
So it's a beautiful day.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question. Have you ever received a email or any type of correspondence telling me that I'm not allowed on that show?
No, absolutely not.
Really?
Casey, he has this thing that he thinks he's banned
I think
from Channel 9.
I think there is a moratorium. I'm not allowed to be on Channel 9.
No.
And I think Charlie Brennan's got a big X across my back.
There's a certain, IQ requirement.
See, way too. That's called the block and pivot right there. I think Casey Nolan's pretty good. All right, Casey, what's the story about this grave they found on this IKEA site?
Here maybe the most interesting thing is that it's so common they have protocols on how to handle it. So I guess there are graves around the city that they run into from time to time that are not on maps, or they're not known. And they did an environmental impact study. They kind of felt like they sort of knew what was in the area. They started moving some earth, getting ready for this IKEA project over here by the grain bins that you can see from Interstate 64, Highway 40. And they hit a vault. And the creepy thing is, it had a crack in the top, and a worker stuck his hand down there with his phone, took a picture, and when he pulled it out, he looked at it, he could see bones. And so they called in cemetery workers, and we were standing there taking some pictures and watching. They didn't really think. They thought they were holding out hope that it was just like an old cistern, because it was made of brick and concrete. It didn't really. The dimensions were kind of bizarre. And they pulled off the top, and the cemetery worker, you could hear him say, "Oh yeah, that's a body."
Was it one body? Was it numerous bodies? Do we have any idea?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe they believe it was just one body.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And they found an old map that made mention of a cemetery, but the map was drawn up even before the streets were drawn up. Before the streets existed in that part of town, and it didn't really give an exact location. But they do have records. The Archdiocese has records of a cemetery called Rock Springs. But they started moving the remains out to Calvary Cemetery in 1865. So these bones go back a bit.
That is the end of the Civil War.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
So they're not sure then, Casey, if there could possibly be other...
No, they're not sure. So today they're going to bring in an X-ray machine to scan this hill. I don't know what size X-ray machine you need to scan a construction site, but that's what they're doing to hopefully, not hit anything else. But they don't think it was, of course it's a sensitive situation, and that was interesting too. Like they were all, it was just a construction site. Whatever they're doing, whatever people do on a construction site, and then all of a sudden you kind of like. Either everyone was on their phone or they got really somber. I'm not sure which, because their backs were turned to me. But it seemed to turn a little reverent there. So they take this, seriously. But it's not technically, it doesn't qualify, I guess, as historic in some sense.
Now, the story goes they also called detectives first, right?
Yeah, well, anytime we hear a lot of calls for homicide. Anytime there's any suspicion for any kind of human remains, the homicide folks are the first ones to show up. They weren't there very long.
Gotcha.
They checked it out and realized this was not their department.
Yeah. This reminds me of the story. They were working on the arch grounds not too long ago, a couple months ago, and there was that story that they found that old, like an old plate and an old fork from the Cahokia people who were here before everybody.
You did that story too, didn't you, Casey?
Yeah, well, there are a couple. So there was the Indian burial ground from when they did the new Mississippi River Bridge, and then there was their work on the Poplar Street Bridge where they found, the
Like a house or something, didn't they?
Yeah, the house, and that was interesting because they were telling me the French kept such good records they could figure out with a fair degree of certainty the individual by name and by even his trade who lived there, because the French kept such precise records of exactly who lived where and what they did. Yeah, they found the outline of a house. They found pieces of pottery that are very rare. It was the oldest artifacts of their kind they had found. It was interesting that of the early St. Louis settlers, they're so hard to find artifacts like that. The oldest in St. Louis. I think they found older things in the St. Genevieve area, but they were so frugal. They didn't. Transportation was still difficult. They didn't have a lot of wealth at the time. So 250 years ago, so they have very little trash. And then when things started picking up, and it was easier to get stuff brought up the Mississippi, and you just threw stuff away when you didn't need it, just kind of discarded it, and then they have all kinds of remains from later in our history.
Casey Nolan, ladies and gentlemen, KSDK reporter, filling us in on a couple of great stories. Casey, be good. We'll watch you on Channel 5. I'm boycotting your Channel 9 show till I'm actually invited on there. So.
I'm boycotting any possible trips to Cuba, just for the record.
Okay, good. Casey, be good. Be safe.
Bye, Casey.
7:58 here. Big 5.